My pregnant wife declared, "This baby deserves a real father. Marcus will adopt her and give us the life you can't." I packed her bags and wished them well. 2 months later, she was sobbing on my porch. I'd been with Lauren for 2.5 years, and everything felt like it was finally falling into place. We had a solid apartment in Denver, I was making good money as an HVAC technician, and she was 7 months pregnant with our daughter. I'd already started converting the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting it soft yellow since we decided to wait until birth to learn the sex, and had been researching the best car seat models for months because that's just how my mind works. That Thursday evening in March, I came home from installing a new furnace system at a downtown office building, expecting to find Lauren reading one of those pregnancy books she'd been obsessing over, but instead she was sitting at our kitchen table with this expression I'd never seen before, distant, almost cold, like she was looking at a stranger. "Nathan, we need to talk about something important," she said, and the way she said my full name instead of the usual, Nate, made my stomach drop because I knew whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. I sat down across from her, still in my work clothes, and waited while she seemed to gather herself for whatever bomb she was about to drop. "I've been thinking a lot about our daughter's future," she began, her hand resting on her swollen belly, "and I've realized she deserves better than what we can give her here." I felt confused because we'd been planning everything together. The crib I'd ordered, the college fund I'd started, the life insurance policy I'd increased, so I asked what she meant by better. That's when she delivered the words that would replay in my head for months. "She deserves a real father, Nathan. Someone who can actually provide for her properly." The statement hit me like a wrench to the chest, but I kept my voice steady and asked her to explain what she meant by a real father. Lauren's eyes were already starting to tear up, but there was something else in her expression, relief, maybe, like she'd been carrying this secret for weeks. "Marcus understands what it takes to build a real life," she said. "He's a successful real estate agent, he owns property, he has connections and ambitions beyond just fixing other people's air conditioners." Marcus. I'd heard her mention him a few times over the past month, some guy she'd met at her prenatal yoga class whose wife was also expecting, but I'd never thought much of it because Lauren had always seemed happy with our simple life together. "Marcus has offered to adopt our daughter and give her the kind of life she deserves," Lauren continued, her voice gaining strength like she was convincing herself as much as me. "A beautiful house in the suburbs, private schools, college funds that actually matter, parents who move in the right social circles." I sat there processing the magnitude of what she was telling me, not just that she was leaving me, but that she'd already planned out an entire future with another man that included him adopting my unborn child. "He can offer us security, Nathan. Real security, not just scraping by hoping your next job pays enough to cover the bills." The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd never missed a bill payment in my life and had saved more money than most people our age, but apparently that wasn't enough for Lauren's vision of what our daughter needed. I asked her how long this had been going on, and she admitted they'd been talking for 6 weeks, that he'd convinced her our daughter deserved a father who could provide real opportunities instead of just getting by. When I pointed out that we weren't getting by but actually building something solid together, she shook her head like I was missing something fundamental. "Marcus drives a BMW, Nathan. He closes deals worth more in a month than you make in a year. He talks about international vacations and investment properties and building generational wealth." I could see the stars in her eyes when she talked about him, the same look she used to get when we'd talk about our own future together, except now those dreams apparently seemed small and inadequate. "This isn't about money, Lauren," I said, though we both knew it absolutely was. "It's about providing the best possible life for our daughter," she shot back. "Marcus can give her things you'll never be able to afford, tennis lessons, study abroad programs, a trust fund that means she'll never have to worry about anything." The conversation went on for another hour, with Lauren explaining how Marcus had it all figured out, how he'd even offered to put her name on the deed to his house so she'd have real security for the first time in her life. She painted a picture of weekend trips to Aspen, private school graduations, and a daughter who'd grow up expecting the finer things in life instead of learning to be satisfied with less. I listened to all of it with growing clarity about who Lauren really was underneath the person I thought I'd been building a life with. When she finally finished explaining her new future, I stood up and walked to our bedroom, hearing her call after me asking where I was going. I came back with 2 suitcases and started methodically packing her belongings, the clothes I'd bought her for Christmas, the pregnancy books, the ultrasound photos we'd hung on the refrigerator. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice like she'd expected me to fight for her or beg her to reconsider. "I'm helping you start your new life," I said calmly, folding her maternity dresses and placing them carefully in the suitcase. If Marcus can give our daughter everything I can't, then you should be with him. Lauren started crying then, not the manipulative tears of someone trying to control a situation, but genuine tears of someone who'd expected a different reaction and was suddenly faced with the finality of her choice. Nathan, I didn't want it to happen this way, she said. I know, I replied, continuing to pack. But this is how it's happening. I drove her to Marcus's house that night, a massive place in Cherry Hills Village that definitely looked like it could provide the life she described, and helped carry her suitcases to the front door where he was waiting with this satisfied smile that told me everything I needed to know about his character. Take care of them, I said to Marcus, shaking his hand like we were conducting a business transaction instead of ending my family. Lauren hugged me goodbye, whispering apologies that felt more like regret for having to hurt me than actual remorse for her choice. As I drove home to our apartment, my apartment now, I felt this strange sense of relief mixed with the obvious pain, like I just discovered something important about the woman I'd been planning to spend my life with. The nursery still needed finishing, but now it would become my office instead, and somehow that felt like the most honest thing that had happened all day. The next morning, I woke up and did what I do best. I made a plan. Lauren had made her choice based on what she thought would provide the best life for our daughter, so I was going to honor that decision by completely removing myself from the equation and letting her build that perfect life without any complications for me. I called our landlord first thing and explained that I'd be breaking our joint lease early, offering to pay the penalty fee myself since this was my decision to make a clean break. Then I went through every shared account, every joint commitment, every piece of our intertwined lives and started methodically separating them like untangling electrical wires. The health insurance was the hardest call to make because removing Lauren meant she'd lose coverage right when she needed it most. But Marcus had assured her he'd handle everything, so I trusted him to follow through on his promises. Our joint checking account had about $8,400 in it, money we'd saved for baby expenses and emergencies, and I transferred her half to a new account in her name only, keeping detailed records of every transaction because that's how my mind works. The baby shower was scheduled for the following Saturday, and Lauren's sister had already sent out invitations, so I called the venue and had them redirect all the gifts and arrangements to Marcus's address in Cherry Hills Village. I figured their friends should celebrate Lauren's new life with someone who could actually afford to host a proper party. My coworkers at Denver Mechanical noticed the change in me immediately because I'd been talking about the baby for months, showing ultrasound pictures and asking advice from the guys who already had kids. When they asked where Lauren was, I simply said she'd decided to be with someone who could provide better for our daughter, and something about the way I said it made them stop asking follow-up questions. My supervisor Jake, who'd been through his own messy divorce, pulled me aside during lunch break and said, "You're handling this better than most men would, but make sure you're actually handling it and not just postponing the breakdown." I appreciated his concern, but the truth was that I felt clearer about everything than I had in months, like Lauren's decision had removed a layer of confusion I hadn't even realized was there. The apartment felt different without her, things everywhere, quieter, more organized, more like the space I'd always imagined for myself before we'd moved in together and compromised on everything from furniture to wall colors. I spent that weekend converting the nursery into a home office, carefully packing away the crib and changing table I'd assembled with such hope just weeks earlier. Each item went into storage with the same methodical care I brought to my work, because even though this hurt, it was also a kind of relief to stop pretending that someone who saw me as inadequate was the right person to build a family with. Lauren texted me a few times that first week, asking about bills and logistics, and I answered each question with the same helpful efficiency I'd use with any customer, providing information without emotional commentary. When she asked if I was angry, I told her honestly that I wasn't. I was just making sure her transition to her new life went as smoothly as possible since that's what she'd chosen for our daughter's future. The strangest part was how normal everything felt once I stopped trying to be someone Lauren needed me to be and just went back to being myself. The guy who showed up on time, did quality work, saved money responsibly, and didn't need external validation to know his own worth. 2 months later, I was coming home from a particularly long day installing a new HVAC system in a restaurant when I found Lauren sitting outside my apartment door, and the sight of her stopped me cold because she looked nothing like the confident woman who'd left me for a better life. She was visibly pregnant now, probably 8.5 months, but everything else about her seemed diminished. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes looked like she'd been sleeping in them, and she was clutching a manila folder full of papers like it contained the only important things left in her world. When she looked up at me, her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate in a way that made my chest tighten despite everything that had happened between us. "Nathan, thank God you're here," she said, struggling to stand up from where she'd been sitting on the floor. "I need to talk to you." Please, I really need to talk to you. I unlocked my door and invited her inside, and the way she looked around my apartment, taking in the new office where the nursery used to be, the lack of her belongings, the evidence that I'd actually moved on, seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She sat down heavily on my couch, still gripping that folder, and I could see her hands shaking as she tried to figure out where to start. Marcus lied to me about everything, she finally said, her voice breaking on his name. Everything he told me, everything he promised, it was all lies. I sat down across from her and waited for her to explain, because the details mattered even though I could already see where this was heading. He's married, Nathan. Has been for 12 years. 2 kids, a wife who had no idea I existed until she found text messages on his phone. The words came tumbling out like she'd been holding them back for weeks. His wife showed up at the house while I was there, screaming about how I was just another one of his side projects, how he'd done this before with other women. Lauren opened the folder with trembling fingers and pulled out what looked like legal documents, her whole body shaking now as she relived whatever had happened. When his wife threatened to call the police, Marcus just threw me out. Told me to never contact him again, that if I tried to go after him for child support or anything else, he'd have his lawyers destroy me. She showed me papers that appeared to be some kind of cease and desist letter, filled with legal language about harassment and false claims. He said I was delusional, that he'd never promised me anything, that I was just some crazy pregnant woman who'd misunderstood casual conversation. I looked at the documents, recognizing the letterhead of one of Denver's more expensive law firms, and realized that Marcus had moved quickly to protect himself once his wife discovered the affair. He took my key to the house, changed the locks, had security escort me off the property like I was some kind of criminal, Lauren continued, tears streaming down her face now. I've been staying in a motel for the past 2 weeks, but I'm almost out of money and the baby's due any day now. The picture she was painting was devastating, a woman who'd burned her bridges chasing a fantasy, only to discover that the fantasy was actually a nightmare designed by someone who'd never intended to follow through on any of his promises. I was so stupid, Nathan. So incredibly stupid. I threw away everything real for someone who was just playing games with me. She looked around my apartment again, seeming to really see it for the first time. You built us a real life, and I traded it away for lies and empty promises. I felt a complex mix of emotions watching her fall apart, sympathy for what she was going through, anger at how she treated what we had, and a strange kind of vindication that my instincts about Marcus had been right. Where are you going to go? I asked, because despite everything she was still carrying my daughter and facing an impossible situation. I don't know, she admitted. My parents live in Kansas, but I'd have to explain everything to them, how I left a good man for someone who turned out to be married. My sister thinks I'm living this perfect life with Marcus. I don't even know how to tell people what really happened. The weight of her isolation was obvious. She'd made this dramatic change based on Marcus's promises, probably telling everyone about her upgrade to a better life. And now she was facing single motherhood with no support system and a story too humiliating to tell. Nathan, I know I have no right to ask this after what I did to you, but could you maybe help me figure out what to do? I'm completely lost here. She was looking at me with the same desperate hope I'd seen in customers whose heating systems failed during blizzards, people who needed someone reliable to solve an impossible problem. I told Lauren I'd help her find resources for single mothers and gave her contact information for a social worker I knew, but I made it clear that I wasn't going to resume our relationship or pretend to be the father of her child after she'd made such a definitive choice about what kind of man deserved that role. She seemed grateful for even that small assistance, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when she realized I wasn't going to rescue her from the consequences of her decisions. That's when her family got involved, and suddenly I was dealing with a full-scale guilt campaign designed to make me feel responsible for Lauren's situation. Her sister Diana called me 3 days later, and I could tell she'd been coached on exactly what to say because her arguments were too polished, too perfectly designed to hit every possible guilt trigger. Nathan, I know Lauren hurt you, but you can't just abandon a pregnant woman in crisis, Diana said. She's 8 months pregnant, living in a motel, and you're the only person who can help her. When I pointed out that Lauren had chosen Marcus specifically because he could provide better than I could, Diana had a ready response. That was a mistake, obviously, but mistakes don't mean an innocent baby should suffer. This isn't about Lauren anymore. It's about doing the right thing for a child who didn't ask to be born into this situation. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Diana painting me as heartless for prioritizing my wounded pride over a baby's welfare, like my refusal to step back into the role Lauren had rejected was somehow proof of my inadequacy as a man. Any decent guy would step up right now instead of holding grudges, she said. The baby needs a stable home, and you're the only one who can provide that. 2 days later, Lauren's mother Patricia showed up at my apartment unannounced, carrying a casserole and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant she wasn't leaving until she'd said her piece. I invited her in because that's how I was raised, but I could tell immediately that this was a planned intervention, not a social visit. Nathan, I've known you for 2 years, and I've always thought you were a good man, Patricia began, setting the casserole on my counter like she was moving back in. That's why I can't understand how you're handling this situation. My daughter is in trouble, and you're the only person who can help her. Patricia had this way of speaking that made disagreeing with her feel like admitting you were morally deficient, and I could see where Lauren had learned some of her manipulation techniques. She made a terrible mistake choosing that Marcus character over you, but she's learned her lesson. Sometimes good people make bad decisions when they're scared about the future. When I explained that Lauren hadn't made a mistake but had made a calculated decision based on what she thought was best for our daughter, Patricia waved that away like it was irrelevant. That man lied to her, Nathan. He took advantage of her fears about providing for the baby. She's the victim here, not you. The conversation went on for over an hour, with Patricia alternating between praising my character and questioning it, telling me how much Lauren regretted her choice while also insisting that I needed to be the bigger person and forgive her. The baby deserves a father who'll step up when things get tough, not someone who walks away when his feelings get hurt, she said. I raised my daughter to expect men to take responsibility, and I thought you were that kind of man. It was masterful manipulation, really positioning my refusal to rescue Lauren as evidence that I was exactly the kind of inadequate man she'd been right to leave in the first place. The family pressure campaign continued for weeks, with cousins and family friends calling to share their opinions about my moral obligations, each conversation carefully designed to make me feel like I was failing some fundamental test of masculinity. But the most interesting information came from my friend Dave, who worked in real estate and had connections throughout the Denver market. I did some asking around about this Marcus guy, Dave told me over beers one evening. Turns out you're not the first woman he's pulled this routine on. He's got a pattern. According to Dave's research, Marcus had been involved with at least 3 other women over the past 5 years, each time promising them a better life and financial security, then disappearing when complications arose. One woman told me he convinced her to max out her credit cards for a down payment on a house that never existed. Another one said he had her sign financial documents that turned out to be loans in her name. The picture Dave painted was of a sophisticated con artist who targeted women in vulnerable situations, promising them exactly what they needed to hear while positioning himself to benefit from their desperation. There's talk that he's being investigated for real estate fraud, Dave continued. Multiple complaints about fake listings, forged documents, deals that never closed but somehow generated commissions. Learning about Marcus's history made me feel vindicated in my initial instincts about him, but it also made me realize that Lauren had been a victim of someone much more calculating than I'd originally thought. When Diana called me again the following week, demanding to know when I was going to step up and do the right thing, I finally lost patience with the whole family manipulation campaign. Diana, Lauren left me because she decided I wasn't good enough to be the father of her child, I said. She chose Marcus specifically because he could provide better than I could. I'm honoring that decision. But Marcus turned out to be a fraud, Diana protested. That doesn't change Lauren's reasoning, I replied. She didn't leave me because Marcus was a good man. She left me because she thought I was inadequate. The fact that her upgrade didn't work out doesn't suddenly make me adequate again. The silence on the other end of the line told me that Diana hadn't expected me to articulate the situation quite that clearly, and when she finally responded, her voice had lost some of its self-righteous certainty. So you're really going to let her struggle alone just to prove a point? I'm going to let her experience the consequences of her choice, which is the most respectful thing I can do, I said. Rescuing her now would be admitting that she was wrong about what kind of man she needed, and I'm not going to undermine her judgment that way. 3 weeks later, I was on a job site installing a new commercial air conditioning system for a downtown office building when I saw Lauren's beat-up Honda pull into the parking lot, and my heart sank because I knew she was desperate enough to track me down at work. I was 40 feet up on a scissor lift, working on the main ductwork connections, when she appeared below me looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen her, now obviously full-term pregnant, wearing the same maternity dress I'd seen her in twice before, her face puffy from crying or lack of sleep or both. Nathan, please come down, she called up to me. I need to talk to you. It's important. My coworkers had stopped what they were doing to watch this pregnant woman have what was clearly going to be an emotional conversation with me, and I could see my supervisor Jake shaking his head because workplace drama was the last thing we needed on a job that was already running behind schedule. I climbed down from the lift, removing my work gloves and safety glasses, trying to maintain some professional dignity while dealing with what was obviously going to be another plea for me to rescue her from her situation. "Lauren, you can't show up at my job site like this," I said quietly. "I'm working. I'm being evicted tomorrow," she said without preamble, her voice cracking with desperation. "The motel wants me gone, and I have nowhere to go. The baby's due any day now, and I'm completely alone." She pulled out her phone and showed me eviction notices and medical bills, her hands shaking as she scrolled through what looked like financial disaster. "Nathan, I know I hurt you, but I'm begging you to help me. Not for me, but for our daughter." I could see my coworkers pretending to work while obviously listening to every word, and I knew this conversation was going to follow me around the job site for weeks regardless of how I handled it. "What happened to your family helping you?" I asked. "I told them the truth about Marcus, and now they're saying this is my mess to figure out," she said. "My mom thinks I deserve this for leaving a good man. My sister won't even take my calls anymore." Lauren started crying then, not the controlled tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who'd run out of options and was facing consequences she'd never imagined. "Marcus didn't just abandon me, Nathan. He destroyed me financially." She pulled out her phone again and showed me credit card statements that made my stomach drop, balances of $8,400, $12,600, and $15,200 on cards I'd never seen before. "He convinced me to apply for these cards to help with the down payment on our house," she said. "Told me it was just temporary, that we'd pay them off immediately after closing. But there was no house, Nathan. There was never going to be a house." The scope of Marcus's deception was becoming clearer, and I realized he'd been running a much more sophisticated con than I'd originally understood. He had me sign papers I thought were for the mortgage, but they were actually cash advances against the credit cards, Lauren continued. By the time I figured out what was happening, he'd already taken almost $40,000 and disappeared. I looked at the statements she was showing me, seeing cash advances and balance transfers that painted a picture of systematic financial abuse. The credit card companies are calling me constantly, threatening legal action. I can't even afford a lawyer to figure out if I have any recourse against Marcus. Lauren was sobbing openly now, not caring that my coworkers were watching or that she was making a scene at my workplace. "I made the worst mistake of my life leaving you, and now I'm facing single motherhood with nothing. No savings, no support system, and debt that'll take me years to pay off." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so obviously exhausted. "Please, Nathan. I know I don't deserve your help, but our daughter deserves a father who'll step up when her mother is in crisis. She deserves better than being born into this disaster I've created." I looked at Lauren, really looked at her, and saw everything she'd traded away from Marcus's empty promises: security, stability, a partner who actually cared about her well-being instead of just using her for his own purposes. "Lauren, I understand you're in an impossible situation," I said gently. "But you chose Marcus because you believed he could give our daughter a better life than I could. You didn't make that choice lightly or impulsively, you thought about it for weeks and decided I wasn't adequate for what you wanted." "I was wrong," she said immediately. "I was so wrong about everything. You were everything I needed, and I was too stupid to see it." "But you weren't wrong about one thing," I continued. "Our daughter does deserve a father who wants to be there, who chooses to be there. Not someone who feels obligated or guilty or manipulated into the role." I could see the hope dying in her eyes as she realized I wasn't going to give her the answer she'd come looking for. "What you're asking me to do is dishonor the choice you made," I said. "You decided I wasn't marriage material, that I couldn't provide the life you wanted for our family. Asking me to rescue you now suggests that decision was wrong, and I'm not going to undermine your judgment that way." Lauren stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, clearly expecting a different response to her crisis. "So you're really going to let your daughter be born into poverty just to prove a point?" "I'm going to let her be born to a mother who made deliberate choices about what kind of life she wanted," I replied. "And I'm going to trust that the same intelligence that led you to choose Marcus will help you figure out how to handle this situation." She stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, before turning and walking back to her car without another word. As she drove away, my supervisor Jake approached and put his hand on my shoulder. That was either the cruelest or the most respectful thing I've ever seen a man do, he said. I'm still figuring out which one, I replied, watching her taillights disappear into traffic. 2 years later, I was shopping for groceries at the King's Supers on Colorado Boulevard when I spotted Lauren in the checkout line ahead of me, and the sight of her stopped me cold because she looked like a completely different person from the confident woman who'd once believed she deserved a better life. She was struggling with a toddler who was having a complete meltdown, screaming and throwing items from the cart while Lauren tried desperately to calm her down with the frazzled exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with this behavior for months. The little girl, our daughter, was maybe 18 months old with Lauren's blonde hair but none of her mother's former composure, and watching her throw a tantrum over a candy bar while other customers stared judgmentally made my chest tighten with complicated emotions. Lauren looked exhausted in a way that went beyond just lack of sleep. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, and she had the kind of defeated posture that comes from months of struggling just to get through each day. I watched her fumble through a stack of coupons with shaking hands, arguing with the cashier about whether a particular discount applied to her generic brand pasta, while our daughter continued screaming and demanding attention. When she pulled out her government assistance card to pay, I could see the shame in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact with other customers like she was expecting judgment about her circumstances. The contrast with my own life was striking because I was there buying ingredients for dinner with Rachel, the architect I'd been dating for 8 months who transformed my understanding of what a healthy relationship actually looked like. Rachel appreciated my steady character and work ethic instead of seeing them as limitations, got excited about my projects instead of dismissing them as small thinking, and contributed equally to everything we built together. We were planning to buy our first house together, a modest but solid place in a good neighborhood where we could build the kind of quiet, stable life I'd always wanted. Rachel had encouraged me to pursue my contractor's license, seeing potential in my skills that I'd never recognized, and with her support I'd started a side business doing residential HVAC installations that was already generating significant extra income. When I got home that evening, I told Rachel about seeing Lauren, and her response perfectly captured why our relationship worked so well. That must have been difficult, she said simply. How are you feeling about it? No judgment, no pressure to feel guilty or responsible, just genuine concern for my emotional well-being and space to process whatever complicated feelings the encounter had brought up. Sad for both of them, I admitted, but also grateful that things worked out the way they did. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. It sounds like she's facing the natural consequences of her choices, and you're living the natural benefits of yours. A few weeks later, I learned more about Lauren's situation through my friend Dave, who had connections throughout Denver's social services network. She's living in subsidized housing on the north side, he told me. Working part-time at a call center, barely making ends meet. The kids having behavioral problems, apparently acting out at daycare, difficulty with attachment issues. According to Dave, Lauren was struggling not just financially but emotionally, dealing with the reality that her choices had led to exactly the kind of unstable environment she'd been trying to avoid when she left me. Word is she's been through 3 different childcare situations because the kid's so difficult to manage, Dave continued. Teachers are saying she shows signs of inconsistent caregiving, probably from all the stress and upheaval. The most satisfying news came a month later when Dave called with an update about Marcus. Remember that real estate fraud investigation I mentioned? They finally arrested him. Marcus had been charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and identity theft after a 2-year investigation revealed he'd been running sophisticated cons on vulnerable women across Colorado. They found evidence of at least 12 different victims, Dave explained. Total damages over $400,000. Some of these women lost their life savings, their credit, everything. Learning about Marcus's arrest gave me a strange sense of closure, not because I wanted revenge but because it confirmed that my instincts about his character had been accurate from the beginning. Lauren wasn't special to him, Dave said. She was just another mark in a pattern that went back years. Guy's been destroying women's lives professionally. The investigation had revealed that Marcus had never owned the house in Cherry Hills Village. It belonged to a client whose property he'd been showing while pretending it was his own. His BMW was leased under a fake business name, his expensive suits were purchased with stolen credit cards, and even his real estate license had been obtained using forged documents. Everything about him was a lie, Dave concluded. Lauren fell for a complete fiction. As I processed this information, I realized that Lauren's current struggles weren't punishment for leaving me, they were the inevitable result of making major life decisions based on surface appearances instead of genuine character. She'd chosen style over substance, promises over performance, and was now learning the difference between men who talk about providing and men who actually do it. Meanwhile, Rachel and I had found a house we loved, submitted an offer that got accepted, and were planning our future together with the kind of practical optimism that comes from building something real on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. When Rachel asked if I ever wondered what would have happened if Lauren had stayed, I could honestly say that I didn't, because the woman who could leave me for someone like Marcus wasn't someone I wanted to spend my life with anyway. "You dodged a bullet," Rachel said simply. "And so did your daughter, in a way. Better to learn early that her mother makes poor decisions than to grow up thinking that's normal." Looking back on everything that happened with Lauren, I've come to understand that my response wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about respecting her autonomy as an adult woman capable of making her own decisions about what kind of life she wanted. When someone tells you that you're not good enough for them, that they've found someone who can provide better, the most respectful thing you can do is believe them and step aside to let them pursue that better life. Lauren had spent weeks evaluating our relationship against what Marcus was offering, weighing my steady but modest income against his apparent wealth, comparing my practical approach to life with his grand promises, and ultimately deciding that I wasn't adequate for the future she envisioned for our daughter. Arguing with that assessment or trying to convince her otherwise would have been disrespectful to her intelligence and her right to choose her own path. By refusing to rescue her when Marcus's promises turned out to be lies, I wasn't punishing her for leaving me. I was honoring her belief that she knew what was best for herself and our child. The fact that her judgment turned out to be flawed doesn't change the principle that adults should be allowed to experience the consequences of their choices, both positive and negative. My relationship with Rachel has taught me what partnership actually looks like when both people choose each other for the right reasons, and the contrast with what I had with Lauren is startling. Rachel doesn't see my work as something to be improved upon or upgraded from. She sees it as evidence of my character, my reliability, my commitment to building something solid. When I tell her about a difficult installation or a satisfied customer, she asks follow-up questions because she's genuinely interested in what I do, not because she's calculating whether it's impressive enough for her standards. We split expenses proportionally based on our incomes, we make decisions together, and we both contribute something meaningful to the relationship beyond just existing and looking attractive. The stability Rachel and I are building isn't the result of one person rescuing the other or providing a better life out of obligation. It's the natural outcome of two people who respect each other's contributions and work together toward shared goals. She doesn't need me to prove my worth by taking care of her financially, and I don't need her to validate my adequacy by staying with me regardless of how I treat her. We're together because we enhance each other's lives, not because either of us has no better options. When I think about Lauren's current situation, struggling in subsidized housing, working part-time for minimal wages, dealing with the behavioral problems that come from the unstable environment she created for our daughter, I don't feel vindicated or satisfied by her difficulties. Instead, I feel a kind of sad clarity about the difference between choosing partners based on what they can provide versus choosing them based on who they actually are. Lauren fell for Marcus's performance of success without looking closely enough at his character, and now she's learning that flash and substance are very different things. Her struggles aren't punishment for betraying me, they're the inevitable result of making major life decisions based on surface appearances and grand promises instead of demonstrated reliability and genuine care. Marcus was a predator who identified her vulnerabilities and told her exactly what she needed to hear to get what he wanted from her, while I was just a guy who showed up every day and tried to build something real. She chose excitement over stability, potential over performance, and image over character, and those choices led naturally to where she is now. The most important lesson I've learned is that you can't build lasting happiness on someone else's inadequacy or desperation. A relationship where one person is supposed to be grateful for the other person's presence is doomed from the start because it's based on inequality rather than mutual choice. Lauren saw me as her best available option rather than her preferred choice, which is why she was always looking for something better and why she jumped at the first opportunity to upgrade. Rachel, on the other hand, chose me from a position of strength. She has her own career, her own income, her own options, which makes her decision to be with me genuine rather than strategic. Next month, Rachel and I are closing on our house, a modest 3-bedroom place with good bones and potential for improvement. I'm planning to propose on the day we get the keys, not because she needs me to rescue her or provide her with a better life, but because we've built something together that we both want to continue building. The ring I bought her is smaller than the one I would have bought Lauren, but it represents something more valuable, a partnership between equals rather than a transaction between someone who provides and someone who accepts. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Lauren had stayed, if she'd never met Marcus, or if she decided that what we had was enough. But then I remember the way she used to talk about our future like it was a compromise rather than a choice, and I realized that version of Lauren was never really happy with me anyway. The woman who could leave a stable relationship for someone she'd known for 6 weeks wasn't someone who was ever fully committed to what we were building together. Her leaving was actually a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time, because it freed both of us to find what we actually needed rather than settling for what felt safe or available.